And tonight on PM Express, a conversation about the Auditor General's report, which is issued every year in conformity with the country's laws. We have discussed here on PM Express a number of government institutions that have been cited in the latest Auditor General's report for causing financial loss to the state. ECG is one of them, SNATE, GMPC, Northern Development Authority, and the Buffer Stock Company. They are all companies whose activities have led to the sum of 10 billion Ghana cedis and more outstanding loans, and which the 2020 Auditor General Report has recommended they find ways of recovering those monies. But really, what has been the practice over the years with regards to implementation of the Auditor General's report? Imani Africa's Honorary Vice President Bright Simons has, for instance, been questioning the Auditor General for not auditing entities like the EC, the NLA, and others because of what he describes as political coloration of some kind. And he makes a strong case why, until the public gains confidence in the fair use of auditing process to guard the public purse, it risks becoming a circus. So tonight we want to avoid that. And my guests will break it down for you to understand the key role, especially played by the internal auditors in achieving this. Just so we refresh our minds on what the 2020 report has said, let's look at few highlights of the 2020 AG's report. And we start with outstanding debts, loans recoverable, and it stands at 10 billion Ghana cedis. And then you move on here and look at irregularities committed by state institutions in 2020. For the irregularities, you realize that there are a lot of irregularities. About how many of them? Okay, 6 here. I think there are about 7. So cash irregularities, payroll irregularities, procurement irregularities, tax irregularities. Cash irregularities stand at 1.8 billion cedis. Payroll irregularities at 9.6 million cedis. Procurement irregularities at 846.1 million cedis. Tax irregularities to 9.2 million Ghana cedis. Stores irregularities at 11.5 million Ghana cedis, and contract irregularities at 89.8 million cedis. And there have been issues about what these breakdown really means. If you talk about procurement irregularities, what exactly are you talking about? If you talk about stores irregularities, what are we talking about? That is why we're going to be breaking it down for you tonight, so you can make sense of the Auditor General's report and why it is very important for the recommendations to be fully implemented. Look at the comparative analysis of the irregularities from 2016 to 2020. We start from 2016. It was just 0.72. In 2017, it shoots up, bam, 12 billion. And then in 2018, wanted to try to do something, it came down. It came down to 3 billion. In 2019, then it shot up again to 5.5. You ask yourself, what really happened? In 2020, look at this trend. Just look at this. 2017, 12, we tried to come down, we went up again. In 2020, we are here back, and even more, 12.8 billion. That's how much we need to secure for the public purse. Now, ECG alone, between 2014 and 2016, procured prepaid meters and conductors worth 59 billion, but the machines are still locked up in the company's warehouse. That's not the only thing the ECG did. The system losses is captured as this: power purchased 10,900.55 gigawatt hours. Power sold 251.47 gigawatt per hour. Now you look at the ECG loss, and it comes at 2,649.08 gigawatt per hour, which represents 24.30% of power purchased from the power producing companies to system losses. This is despite the creation of revenue protection divisions and installation of automatic systems. Now, ECG also, we've talked about this already, and then ECG, out of the total figure, it gives 1.8 billion cash irregularities, which is 442.73 million cedis, represented cash locked up in non-performing investment by SNIT. So we've moved on from ECG to SNIT. In GMPC, according to the report, GMPC signed and awarded 5 international business contracts between 2015 to 2018 without the necessary parliamentary approval. Remember that at ECG, same thing happened. They gave out materials worth over 12 million cedis, and then without no agreement. They gave it out for loans and they didn't sign any agreement. The Northern Development Authority is said to have invested an amount of 5 million into the investment company, Man Capital Microfinance Limited, in 2015. The NDA's investment was done without the approval of the finance ministries. All of this are misappropriations, and which the Auditor General captures. Now, we look at some of the recommendations that the Auditor General made. A buffer stock also payments in sum of 1.9 million made for goods and services, including purchases of fuel coupons, maintenance activities, were without approval and authorization. And all of these, there are recommendations to deal with them. For the ECG, Auditor General recommends that management of ECG ensure that the prepayment meters and conductors are issued out to the users. Now, failure to do so, the amount involved should be recovered from the officers who engaged in the procurement. It was recommended also that the management of GMPC should be sanctioned in accordance with Section 92 of the Public Procurement Act 2003 as amended for breaching the public procurement law. Now, on SNIT, management of SNIT have been urged to investigate the non-performance of the investment to ensure value for money. Now, there's been mixed reactions to the Auditor General's report, and one of the few people who've been writing on this is Imani Africa's Honorary Vice President. He has questioned why the AG did not include other entities like the EC, the NLA, and others. And he says, is it because of political colorations? That's why the Auditor General is avoiding these entities. He says the auditing process risks becoming a circus show until the public is confident in its fair and impartial use to restore sanity to the public financial management. So tonight we're asking, how do we avoid the circus? And that's why I have all the people who matter. And from the internal audit point of view, how do we ensure implementation of the recommendations made by the Auditor General? Let's have a full conversation after this break. Welcome back to PM Express. Tonight we're breaking down the Auditor General's report for you so you can make sense of it. He did a number of them, but we're focusing on one that is causing a lot of the public to lose a lot of money. And that's what we're focusing on tonight. Dr. Oduro is Director General of the Internal Audit Agency. He joins me in the studio. I'm grateful for your time, Dr. Oduro. Now also joining me via Zoom is Linda Ofori-Kwafo, who is Executive Director of the Ghana Integrity Initiative. And also joining us, thankfully, is Joseph B. Winful, who is the Chairman of the Internal Audit Board. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. All right, so it's fair to start from the studio. And a number of issues have come up after this whole thing started. The first is the irregularities bit. It seemed to be technical. People need to understand. And if you look at what Bryce Simmons says, he says, we need a better clarification scheme for irregularities. That will help. Why is he saying that? He says, just portions of, he says the current Auditor General Department's clarification scheme for irregularities focuses on the source of the irregularities, but not really on the impact and degree of concerns. For example, when a public sector institution does not receive its budgetary allocation and therefore fails to pay the social security entitlements of its employees for the particular year, we cannot in good conscience sum up all the liabilities and call the final number a loss to the state or a failure to make savings, which are two primary components of the current definition of irregularities. Such lapses cannot be quantified as losses to the state in the same way that they can if the situation had been one of embezzlement of the funds allocated for social security payments. I mean, how do you break this down, as far as irregularities is concerned?
Thank you very much, Aisha. I think annually, government allocates funds to public institutions. These funds are allocated on the basis of a budget. The budget has guidelines. So we have financial regulation that guides the disbursement of these funds. As soon as an institution fails to disburse or spend the funds according to the guidelines, you have misapplied or misappropriated the funds. The misapplication or misappropriation may come under various headings. An external auditor that comes to audit can decide to classify the various misappropriation or irregularities under the heading that suits the objectives of the audit.
Okay.
So anybody who wants to attack this audit report must first look at the objectives of the audit. And in the past, we've had 6, 7 areas of clarification.
Yeah.
And the areas of clarification are important because of the PFM cycle we have. For instance, cash irregularities are critical areas that any auditor may want to do because that is direct defalcation, direct stealing, direct suppression of cash.
Okay.
So cash irregularities is critical. When we come to payroll irregularities, as a country, we've had a lot of challenges managing our payroll, ghost names, people earning unearned salaries and all of that. So it is also a critical area. When you look at procurement irregularities, under the public financial management cycle, procurement irregularities concerns itself with not using the right procurement procedures, short supplies, short changing, and all of that, or not using even the required procurement method. So let us understand that the irregularity headings have been classed according to the objectives of the audit, which is responding to the PFM cycle.
Okay. But what do you make of the reading, the findings of the Auditor General's report?
I think these findings, from where I sit at the Internal Audit Agency, are not new findings because under the public financial management system, before the external auditor comes, the internal auditors would have done the audit on a quarterly basis and submitted the report to us. So some of these findings have been seen a year before the external auditors came. They are alarming, and I think that we should not allow it to continue to exist in the books. It is now the duty of internal auditors and audit committees to pick up these reports and then run with it, pursue management to implement them. But Aisha, let me also explain to people that this Auditor General's report is a consolidation of all the findings.
Okay.
We have another document we call Letter of Weakness or Management Letter, which outlines the weaknesses that occasioned these irregularities. The management letter is with the institutions, and the audit committees may have to pursue those ones. But I must say, the figures are alarming, and as an internal audit agency, we will want to work with the audit committees to pursue them to implement the recommendations indicated in the report.
But why is it, increasing over the years? It's never gone down, actually.
Well, Aisha, for the public boards and corporations, it has increased by 135% over that of the previous year.
That is alarming.
It is alarming, but when you look at that of MDAs, it has dropped.
Okay.
So it is not all that bad.
That is why our focus is not there, because we're not seeing a lot of monies being squandered and embezzled over there.
Okay.
But this particular one has shot up too much.
It has shot up too much. And when you look at the component of the irregularities, there were things that could have been managed. For instance, the ECG bit. The ECG bit, the absence of audit committee, for instance, it is something that we have discussed with them. We've written to ECG. They have just refused to set up an audit committee. So most of the things have been highlighted by the internal auditors before the external auditors came. But I also think that the weaknesses in the internal audit legislation in this country is also part of the problem. But thankfully, that issue is being resolved, because if we had strengthened the internal audit system and then strengthened the audit committee system, the audit committees are there to pursue management to implement these recommendations, which would have been highlighted by the internal auditor before the external auditors comes in. So I think that a strengthening of internal audit laws and the structures and audit committees is one of the best ways of preventing these things from happening.
Let me bring in Mrs. Kwafo. Ms. Kwafo, over the years, there's been concerns over the Auditor General's report gathering dust because, I mean, we never get it fully implemented. Why then should we carry out an audit if we will not implement the recommendations?
Thank you very much, Aisha. I hope you can hear me well.
Loud and clear.
And good evening to all your viewers and listeners. I must say that the figures that you projected before the start of the program, for me, it's quite worrying. And the reason being that it saddens me when I see the issues reoccurring. And sometimes I wonder what we do with the laws, the policies, the guidelines that is supposed to help in preventing some of these irregularities. And I must say, when I saw the invites and the discussion, that the heading of trying to, how do we implement the recommendations? I am not interested even in the implementation of the recommendations. I am interested in how come to date we've not been able to stop some of these things from happening. Dr. Josai talked about some of these irregularities are picked up and recommendations actually made, and even the management letters telling the organizations and whatever they are supposed to do before even external auditors come. The example is cited with ECG. Why would ECG still not set up their audit committee, and why is nobody sanctioning them? Sometimes we don't have to wait till this stage. My point is, what are the rules, regulations, policies around these subject matters that keeps on making us having the kind of findings in the Auditor General's reports? And you are like, the people who work in these organizations are not interested in implementing recommendations of the past, keep on having these same things reoccurring. We had a project that was funded by USAID called the others. And some of the things that we did was to look at the implementation of audit committee reports and Auditor General's reports and all those things, the recommendations, implementation. And it actually came to the fore. That's a very large extent. We just don't do them. So then why don't we prevent them from happening? And that is, for me, that's what happens all over the world. The prevention of the irregularities, the prevention of the abuse, of the stealing, of whatever it is, it's actually making us have all these huge figures in the report is what we should be talking about. As for the recommendations and when are we going to implement same, and even when we implement it today in 2020, in 2021, 2022, they will keep occurring. So how do we prevent them from happening? And who is getting sanctioned for not doing the right things? We have the Public Procurement Act. Yes, we have the Act, we have everything that's supposed to guide us to do what we are supposed to do. What other laws do we need? It's all about holding somebody accountable. At ECG, for instance, holding somebody accountable, all the organizations that we're talking about. And then I think that is what we are lacking. And so I just feel some way talking about implementation of the recommendations. 2022, we will find the same recommendations.
But what do you think is the challenge? What's the challenge of the Auditor General not being able to put these people before court and make sure that they face the law?
Well, for us to be able to do same, even before you move to Auditor General, being able to put people before court, the institutions have heads. The institutions have internal auditors. The institutions have whatever they have to prevent some these things from happening. Maybe it's because nobody is getting sacked because the Auditor General's reports that we saw about an organization is not good enough. Why is the people within this organization not doing anything about leadership in the institutions itself is very, very critical for me. And externally, as we know, the auditors coming after these irregularities have happened. So then Auditor General is supposed to strengthen and for them to make good use of whatever laws they are supposed to make good use of. But then before we get there, the leadership at the institutional level is my concern. Somebody or some people should be accountable for some of these irregularities that happen year in, year out.
For instance, with the ECG if you look at what was recommended, it's either we put the meters to use, or whoever led the procurement should be made liable to and deal with him. But will this happen? Let me bring in Mr. Winful here. Mr. Winful, what's the role of the internal auditors and internal committees in ensuring that the recommendations are fully implemented? I mean, Dr. Odro rightly mentioned that at the ECG, for instance, they lack auditing committees, which is problematic.
Yes, good evening to you all. Actually, I would look at it holistically and say, what is causing all this? Because we cannot talk about the role of the internal auditor and the audit committees in isolation.
Yeah.
This problem, I call it a problem, it's an issue, it's a headache. It's been with us for a long time. We have so many, stages of going through our perceived accountability. We have the Public Accounts Committee. They've been going through Auditor General's report for decades. What has come of it? There's been, exposure of a lot of misallocations, misapplications, and the rest of it. We talk about it, we discuss it, and nothing happens about it. I call what is happening, I term them as the symptoms of the main problem.
Okay.
And I see the main problem as having institutional leadership. As Madam mentioned about accountability, holding persons accountable. I'll go a step further and say that it starts from the tone at the top. That is the leader of the institution. Is he competent enough? Has he got the integrity? Has he the capacity and the capabilities to undertake the assignment? If appointments are made on those bases, you're going to have a leader who will not allow all this to happen. Because the leader will even insist that the lieutenants know exactly what they are supposed to do and will be held accountable. And as a result, you're not going to have this. Why do we have Ghanaians in the private sector who are doing so well or making the organization do so well?
Okay.
I mean, all that we're talking about, ECG and the rest of them, are commercial entities. Compare them to the private sector commercial entities. Is it the same? And they are headed by the same Ghanaians. So what is happening? It means we do not have the right leaders heading these institutions. And as a result, they have not also ensured that they will have the right lieutenants who will support them in undertaking the necessary steps that will ensure that those institutions, that is the companies, are doing so well.
Okay.
I mean, what is being shown us or what is being stated by the Auditor General will not be acceptable in the private sector. And the private sector are also headed by Ghanaians.
Definitely.
So yes, if you are saying what should the internal auditor do, or how should we approach recommendation, implementation of recommendations, and so on, we can go through all that. And I will see it as being theoretical because we'll go through it. When it comes to the implementation, we might not even have the right caliber of people who are to tackle the implementation or to provide oversight for the implementation. So really, our problem starts from the top. You know, now that we have the internal audit being restructured, you realize that even Dr. Osai is new. And we had to make sure that as a board, we brought in someone who will be able to handle the assignment on hand so that we can have a peaceful sleep when we go to sleep. Because if it's not working or we don't have a real functioning institution, I can assure you, board members wet their salt will not just close their eyes and go to sleep.
Okay.
They are there not because of, the tea and biscuits and discussions. They are there purely because they want to leave a legacy and be credited with having done a good job.
Okay.
So please, we've got to confront the leadership issue and make sure that the right persons are really appointed.
Okay.
And if we do that, the battle will be half won.
Okay.
Because you can bring in all the systems, procedures, laws, legislations, and what have you. At the end of the day, that human being who is supposed to direct and oversee and ensure that things are done properly, that will be missing because we've gotten the wrong person.
Dr.
And to me, that is the headache we have.
Okay, Dr. Sai, I'm happy he talks about the caliber of people, whether we have the caliber of people needed to actually get this to work. And he talks about us confronting the leadership issue. What would it take for us to address these challenges?
Thank you very much. We just have to put the leaders in check. This same leader,
but first of all, do we have the caliber of people to make this work?
We do have them. But the system is so loose that they are able to have their way. These same people, if you plant them in another system where the checks and balances are working, where the whips they can crack the whip on them, you see them performing exceedingly. So what we need to do is activate and allow the checks and balances to work and get the right leaders in the right positions, and things would work.
Let me bring you in, Lindo Furikwafu. What do you expect to see with this 2020 report?
Okay, so then from the beginning, I said I don't want to see the reoccurrence of same. And I agree with Bryce Simmons when he talk about circles.
Okay.
The reason being that now we have it. What we do with them? Obviously, the rates and the extent of implementation of audit recommendations, as we also know, has not been anything to write home about.
Yeah.
And so then they gather dust, as you rightly said, from the onset. And I think for this time around, we should be more concerned about how the audit committees implement same.
Okay.
If there can be any monitoring of a sort from civil society's angle to continue to ensure that even as the recommendations have been documented and circulated, they are implemented. And implementation also going with the non-occurrence of same. So then they should be side by side. We have the audit committees ensuring or contributing and overseeing the implementations of same. And then we also making sure that in 2022, we start going down. So far as they're going to end anytime soon, but then so far as the figures involved are concerned, I sometimes I get people telling me that the irregularities themselves are not corruption. I'm interested in dealing with corruption, but the fact that they are not corruption, why are they happening? The monies are intended for particular purposes. The moment you move them away to do other things, then obviously we are not going according to plan. So Dr. Udru talked about having the budget and then having everything in place for us to do the work that we are supposed to do annually. When I listened to the chair, when he talked about the leadership and the whatever, I also wanted to add to technical capacities. Sometimes we might think that these organizations all do have the capacities that they have to do the work that they have to do. But sometimes they might need some more support or capacity enhancement in the areas that they work to ensure that they have the knowledge and also the audacity to prevent them from happening. I am now on a tangent on advocating for using prevention methods and approaches in dealing with some of these matters. In advanced jurisdiction, I always say that they have more strengthened legislation to sanction, and they also have same to prevent. And their prevention mechanisms is also what we have. It's just about the people doing the work who sometimes do not have the audacity to do it, or just are benefiting from it and so will not ensure that the right things are being done. Going forward, I believe that we have to do both. trying to ensure the implementation of these recommendations. And that one, I will urge civil society organizations to continue doing like we used to do under the others project. And then secondly, to ensure that the internal audit work within the various institutions are strengthened and done to the extent that 2022, we are going to see some of these figures going down. We shouldn't be tolerating and allowing sin. It's worrying and it saddens my heart when I see that the same Ghanaians, as the chair said, managing or working in private sector are doing excellently well. But then when it comes to public sector, it's like, oh, let us do it anyway. And I think it's nobody's business. Now we have a very good leadership at the top as far as internal audit agency is concerned. And for me, that is the angle we should go. Try to use the internal audit agency to prevent corruption, irregularities from happening. And then subsequently, we'll start seeing the good results in our external audit reports.
You know, in all of this, we've been talking about the entities, ECG, SNET, buffer stock, and all of that. I want to see us piercing the veil and getting the individuals behind the veil and dealing with them. When can we have the opportunity of doing that so that we can avoid a recurrence? Again, I was happy you talked about the fact that there are times when people say they did value for money and everything, and so it's not actually corruption. What would you call this? You buy the things, and I remember Daniel Domelevu, the former Auditor General, used to be so much concerned about this, that you buy things, you did value for money, but the things are there wasting. It's not put to use. So what would you call this? When I return from this break, we'll be asking all of these questions and trying to find answers to them. Stay with me. PM Express, we are actually breaking down the Auditor General's report for you and also ask the questions, why don't we fully implement the recommendations? What would it take to hold people accountable so that in 2022, for instance, we don't see a recurrence of this huge amount of monies quoted in the Auditor General's report? Let me talk about I'm sure maybe the issues of law could be a problem, because I know that the Auditor General is mandated to surcharge and disallow. But this, in this whole report, how many pages? About 800? That's right. There was no single page where you saw the Auditor General surcharging. I mean, what does that make your work difficult?
Yes, it does. It makes our work difficult, because if the Auditor General has gone ahead to surcharge and disallow, then following through, we would also work with some of the prosecutorial institutions to follow through with his recommendations. But that notwithstanding, as it is now, it is within the domain of internal auditors and the audit committees to pursue management to implement their recommendations. But the internal audit also has a challenge, because internal auditors in this country falls under different institutions. Those in SOEs falls under SIGA. Those in the local government falls under Office of Head of Local Government Service. Those at MDs falls under Office of Head of Civil Service. You know, so they are not under the direct control of the agency. So again, you are supposed to pursue management to implement recommendations, and they are the ones that will determine your conditions of service. So it's a difficult situation, but thankfully, the internal audit service bill is under consideration, and the Ministry of Finance is working very hard to restructure it. So once it is restructured, we will see a reduction of some of these things. But at this stage, the audit committees are working with the internal auditors to pursue management to implement these recommendations.
But I'm happy you talked about the audit committees, which is supposed to be formed in all the entities,
That's
the
right.
ECG. And for instance, at the ECG, you said, the report said they didn't have that committee. I mean, whose duty is it to ensure that this committee is there? And I mean, how does the committee in itself, you know, take us out of this irregularity?
Okay, the committee is a statutory committee created under the Public Financial Management Act, and every head of public institution is expected to have the audit committee. It is made up of 5 members, 3 independent members, and then 2 from management. Okay. The independent members are made up of professional accountants from the Internal Audit Agency and the Institute of Chartered Accountants. The reason we have this committee there is to make sure that they will pursue management to implement recommendations from internal audit report, external auditors report, directive from Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, then also monitoring report from the monitoring committees of the institutions. So any institution that do not have an audit committee means that the control system is weak because the control structures may not be working. And that is the situation ECG found itself. Though the ECG claims that the board subcommittee on finance is performing the function of the audit committee, the PFM has standards and they fail to comply with that. Okay. So that is how it is. But I must say that most of the institutions in this country have the audit committees functioning, except that the audit committees also, they have a challenge. The challenge is that the financing the operations of audit committee is a challenge. So most of the institutions whose leadership will have to be pursued to implement these recommendations are the same persons or institutions that will have to pay for the sitting allowance of the audit committees. Okay. So it is like giving the person the ammunition to shoot you. So they will not finance the audit committees to meet. Okay. So that is why there is a new bill that Ministry of Finance is working on to create an internal audit service under which the activities of audit committees and that of all the scattered internal auditors will come under the new internal audit service, so that we'll be able to properly pursue these institutions to implement these recommendations.
Where are we with this bill?
It's a first draft has been developed. It is yet to go to cabinet for cabinet approval. Then Parliament would pass it. But it will be passed in a record time. That is what we've been assured.
Mr. Winful, when we talk about piercing the veil and dealing with the people behind the veil, what exactly do you expect?
Well, actually, when you say lift the veil, that is what should happen. Because we have appointed chief executives for these institutions. And these chief executives have been given certain mandates and objectives to achieve. They are to run these institutions effectively and efficiently to deliver on what the institutions are mandated to deliver on. Now, we have to hold those leaders accountable for the results that comes out. And if they are unable to discipline their own people, or if they are unable to ensure that their people have the adequate training, if they are unable to effectively direct their staff to do the right thing, we cannot go down and hold the staff accountable. We have to hold the leaders accountable. And if we start doing that, devoid of all political contacts and the rest of it, because sometimes some of the challenges, are as a result of some interferences from, outsiders, parliamentarians, what have you. So we have to be determined to say that we are going to do what is supposed to be done according to law, according to best practice. And it's only when we are able to do that that we'll be able to achieve what we want to achieve. So when you lift the veil, it means we have actually appointed the right people. We've given them all the authority that they need to do their jobs. At the end of the day, we are going to hold them accountable. They've got to account for their stewardship. Otherwise, the institution will not do much. If you look at what we are talking about, ECG, and what they've done by way of, accumulating meters that are not going, ECG has been saddled with a lot of, mismanagement of certain functions and affairs for a very long time. This is not the beginning of the woes at ECG. But you also realize that we have not been holding those responsible accountable. The CEO and the lieutenants, the chief operating guy, the chief of finance. we should be holding them accountable for what is expected of them. And it's only when we are able to hold them accountable and become fearless in holding them accountable, that is when you will maybe see an improvement in the performance. I read in the auditor's report about performance audit. And performance audit involves a lot. That is where you even have your value for money and the rest of it.
Okay.
And we talk about value for money. I don't think we are ensuring that there's value for money. We talk about safeguarding the pest. I don't think we are. Now, these are all, what comes out of the Auditor General's report is what we refer to as the misapplications and so on and so forth, and the misappropriations.
Yeah.
Some call it stealing, also involved, and so on. But what we've got to also pay attention to is what I call the waste.
The waste, yes.
The waste in the system. If you are to examine the processes that we go through, you will see that maybe we are spending money unwisely, or we are spending money that should not be spent because there's no value in the outcome of that disbursement. But we still do it. So until we ensure that we are going to hold, persons we've placed in positions of trust accountable, we are not going to get anywhere. And it's been said, or there's a school of thought, that part of the problem we have in Ghana is because the citizenry are not interested in the financial management of the country. They are not, or they don't understand it, or we've deprived them of the knowledge of understanding what is expected. As a result, if you were doing, a concert on the TV, you will have more patronage than if you were discussing, flaws within our financial management systems and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Maybe that is why. So a greater number of our population have not shown much interest, understanding, or appreciation of the need for effective financial management, because that is what will lead to the effective utilization of our resources for the benefit of the people of Ghana.
Thankfully, Lindo Forikwafu is here. At GII, that's what you do. That's your specialty. How do you intend to push that people behind these corrupt acts, hiding behind that veil, are brought out to face the law?
Thank you very much, Aisha. I was thinking, it just occurred to me that the Auditor General's report should be a good assessment or evaluation document for the appointing authority. And once we talked about leadership at the institutional level, I'm wondering what the appointing authority should be doing with the findings, and why somebody should not be going home based on some of these recommendations.
Exactly.
If monitoring is very difficult, we have a document now to use. And if you're talking about performance management and all that, I think the Auditor General's report is a good start for the appointing authority to tell us what it's going to do with us. But sometimes the institutional heads and internal auditors that work below them might not be able to do much. Obviously, this is the truth. And so then Dr. Odua was trying to explain to us how the system works and who works under who when it comes to the internal auditors. But then now we have a document that can help the appointing authority to tell us something. The second point I want to mention before I go on to the issue you raised is the surcharge and disallowance mandate of the Auditor General. Are we throwing it into the bin? You just mentioned that in the over 800 or pages or so report, we did not see a single. And you remember not too long ago, we went to court. I think, I've forgotten, this is Occupy Ghana, Imani went to court and together, and then there was a ruling. So then we have a law on that. So we are supposed to use it. What happened? I think we should be calling the acting Auditor General to be giving some responses. For all you may know, he didn't find it necessary. But from the figures you mentioned at the beginning of this program, it would be very it's surprising to me why such mandates was not invoked, and why are we not seeing any recommendations to those that effect, that certain people are being surcharged to be able, so far as their mandate is concerned. And I think we should be calling on the acting Auditor General to explain to us. Maybe there are some good reasons behind that, and that is a question we should be asking. And obviously, I also want to say that civil society organizations like GII, as you rightly mentioned, we should take the Auditor General's report and get more serious about following up on the recommendations, on the implementation of the recommendations that are documented in there. And for me, that is the way to go. I am very much interested in taking this work up together with other NGOs that are interested in this.
Okay, so I want you to wrap it up for me, Dr. Odrosai. I mentioned a bit about the wastage, and Mr. Winfield also hammered on that. The fact that sometimes we say we've done value for money. We purchase the items, they are there, they're going waste, but we've abided by procurement law, we've done everything right. But the items we bought have not been put to use. What do you call that? And finally, the one I want to leave you with is the quote from Bright Simons. He says, until the auditing process gets to a state where the public as a whole, but more specifically the civil servants on the front line, are confident in its fair and impartial use to restore sanity to the public financial management, I mean, it will still become what? It will serve as a little more than fodder for periodic circus shows. What does this mean for the internal audit?
Well, it's about the independence and objectivity of the internal auditor. And like I said earlier on, they are constrained under the current law, but the current law is under review. So I think that going forward, there is a need for all of us to push. When it comes to irregularity, when it comes to wastage, people may have we may have seen people comply with the Public Financial Management Act. But you see, the Public Procurement Act itself is also a challenge. So I think that, one, we need capacity building, and then two, we need to crack the whip, and then three, we need to engender confidence in the technical officers and the civil servants that when you apply the law to the latter, you will be protected. And then in addition to that, if we strengthen internal audit and the laws regulating internal audit and audit committees in this country, we will be able to apply the preventive rule rather than using the post-mortem rule when the horses have already bolted from the stable. Okay,
this is a conversation that will continue because until 2022, this latest Auditor General's report is what we'll be working with, and we'll have to see work in progress. Thank you so much, Dr. Odrosai, for joining us. He's Director General of the Internal Audit Agency. He's also a lawyer and a governance expert. Lindo Forikwafu is Executive Director of the Ghana Integrity Initiative, and Joseph Winfield is also Chairman of the Internal Audit Board. I'm grateful, all of you, for your time. Enjoy the rest of our programs.
My name is Kujo Yankson. Let me tell you how to turn back time. You can now bring back all the fun, all the excitement, all the controversy of the Super Morning Show and all your favorite Joy shows when you go to myjoyonline.com/podcasts. Just select your favorite show and bring it all back again. Joy 99.7 FM, radio for discerning listeners.
It's radio. Joy 99.7.
Up close on Reason is Jesus. My name is P.P. Fulton, the Christocentrica.